When I landed my first job fresh out of college, I was thrilled to finally start building my own life. Yet, despite working full-time and juggling multiple side gigs, saving enough for a down payment on a modest apartment seemed impossible. My student loan payments loomed large, rent devoured most of my paycheck, and the dream of owning a home, something my parents talked about as if it were normal, felt further away than ever. Meanwhile, friends from my parents' generation often shared stories of buying houses in their 20s with ease and watching their investments grow steadily over the years.
Generations of young people who are losing hope.
Young millennials struggling to get in.
My experience is far from unique. Across the country, younger adults like me are facing economic hurdles that don't seem to match the promises once laid out by previous generations. It's not just about hard work or ambition. Many are running up against invisible walls built long before they entered the workforce. These barriers shape how they live, plan, and hope for the future, even as they struggle with rising costs, mounting debt, and limited opportunities. The story behind these struggles traces back to decisions made decades ago, when one generation was able to seize advantages that set them apart. Understanding this history is key to grasping why today's economic landscape looks so different, and why the paths to stability and prosperity are no longer what they used to be. As we unpack these realities, the patterns become clear. What seems like an uphill battle for millennials and Gen Z isn't just bad luck, but part of a larger system shaped by policies and priorities that benefited some while leaving others behind. In the years following World War II, the United States transformed into an environment of extraordinary opportunity. Millions of returning veterans stepped into a labor market that was expanding at a historic pace. New factories, government infrastructure projects, and a growing service sector generated robust job creation. Unemployment dropped to record lows, and for the first time, the majority of American families could expect at least one stable, well-paying job with generous benefits. In manufacturing especially, unionized positions offered high wages, health insurance, and the promise of a pension, opportunities nearly unrecognizable to many younger workers today. Support for this prosperity came from deliberate government action. The GI Bill, for example, extended free or affordable college to millions of veterans.
GIs could get up to $500 of tuition, and that would cover tuition at any private or public institution in the United States,
paving the way for higher education to become accessible to an unprecedented swath of the population. Tuition at public universities and state colleges cost a fraction of a year's pay and could often be covered by summer jobs. Many who had never imagined college as an option found themselves earning degrees without burdensome debt. The federal government also revolutionized home ownership, turning it into a defining feature of the American dream for this generation. The creation of VA loans and FHA-backed mortgages allowed veterans and young families to purchase houses with little or no money down and fixed interest rates. Surging demand fueled the mass construction of affordable suburban neighborhoods. New homes sprang up outside cities, offered with lawns and modern amenities at prices that appeared modest even then. Many baby boomers as parents were the first in their extended families to own property. As those homes climbed in value over the following decades, the windfall proved transformative, anchoring long-term financial security and creating inherited wealth still passed down today. Employment benefits in this era went far beyond today's standard offerings. Health insurance was typically employer-paid, providing security against medical catastrophes, while defining benefit pensions promised a reliable income throughout retirement years. Unions played a crucial role here, overseeing collective bargaining that delivered not just high wages, but also job stability and regular wage increases tied to productivity gains. Entire industries, from automobiles to steel, were highly organized. In comparison, union membership rates have fallen sharply since the 1980s, and younger workers today face far more precarious employment, fewer protections, and stagnant wages despite rising productivity. For baby boomers, entrance into adulthood often meant stepping onto this homeowner's lottery. Buying a starter house in their 20s was the norm, not the exception. There were few barriers. Starter homes were both plentiful and affordable compared to incomes, and competition from investors or speculators was minimal. Over the next 40 years, these homes appreciated at a rate that far surpassed wage growth. Stories abound of boomers buying homes for $20,000 or $30,000 and watching them rise in value by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Wealth accumulated purely from timing and policy, not unique cleverness or risk-taking. The broad, equitable playing field enjoyed by boomers was not an accident, nor did it persist. During the 1980s and after, massive shifts in policy and economic priorities began to tear down the supports that had elevated an entire generation. Public investment in higher education stagnated or declined. Tuition soared at public universities, forcing Millennials and Gen Z students to borrow heavily. Today, it is not unusual for young adults to spend a decade repaying student debt before even considering buying a home. On top of this, union power waned dramatically, leaving most private sector workers without any reliable means of negotiating wage increases or job protections.
And now in the private sector, only 6% of U.S. workers are organized by unions, meaning 94% are non-union.
Social safety nets weakened, and employer-backed pensions largely disappeared, replaced by do-it-yourself retirement plans far more vulnerable to economic downturns. Boomers' prosperity set the bar for what a good life looks like in America. Home ownership while still young, steady job progression, affordable college, generous retirement. All are expectations inherited by Millennials and Gen Z. Yet, the mechanisms that once supported these achievements have been eroded. The public policies, union protections, and affordable education that lifted boomers into the middle class simply do not exist to the same degree for their children and grandchildren. Instead, today's young adults are often told to work harder, save more, or take on debt for the same milestones once offered as a matter of course. Understanding this landscape reveals a structural chasm. Boomers' advantage was not a matter of luck alone. Rather, it was cemented through decisions by government, employers, and the boomers themselves to entrench these gains and, in many cases, remove the rungs of the ladder for those who followed. This foundation invites a closer look at how these mindsets and choices consolidated the gains made by boomers, complicating the path to equity between generations. Life for Millennials and Gen Z is shaped by a set of invisible walls built long before they came of age. Barriers made by policies, social currents, and economic conventions that tilt the playing field. These barriers do not reflect personal shortcomings, but the lingering effects of systems that enabled and enriched previous generations. The world Millennials and Gen Z stepped into was already marked by significant shifts in higher education. For baby boomers, public colleges and universities were heavily subsidized, meaning tuition remained low and government grants covered much of the remainder. Attending a state university in the 1960s or 1970s could cost less than a few weeks' wages from a summer job, and graduates entered the workforce largely debt-free. This accessibility made college a reliable stepping stone to a stable middle-class life. Shifts in public policy steadily eroded this ladder. As states slashed funding for public universities and the federal government pulled back support, schools responded by hiking tuition and introducing new fees. By the 2000s and 2010s, affording college meant taking on staggering amounts of student debt. Whereas boomers could often graduate with little to no debt, the average new graduate now shoulders tens of thousands of dollars in loans, with monthly payments that hinder savings for homes, starting families, or investing in retirement. The burden is more than financial. The psychological toll of lifelong debt reshapes decision-making and expectations, binding the aspirations of generations who must live with the consequences of these policy choices. Beyond the gates of academia, the labor market presents another set of obstacles. Previous generations entered a workforce shaped by high rates of unionization, robust labor protections, and a culture of collective bargaining that secured rising wages, steady employment, and comprehensive benefits. For boomers, strong unions not only delivered better pay but established clearer paths to advancement and ensured the promise that work would eventually provide middle-class security. The unraveling of unions and the erosion of work protections, often the result of deliberate legislative decisions, fundamentally changed the game for those who came later. As union membership fell and collective bargaining weakened, the bargaining power of workers diminished, and employers gained the ability to keep wages stagnant even as profits soared. Millennials and Gen Z now face precarious work arrangements, gig jobs, and contract roles with limited security, all while costs for essentials have surged. The gap between the cost of living and take-home pay has widened, making it increasingly difficult to afford rent, healthcare, or start families. These realities are not byproducts of economic forces alone. They have been shaped by the systematic dismantling of institutions that previously empowered workers. No obstacle is more visible or more contentious than the crisis of housing. Boomer-era homeowners benefited as property values rose in the wake of policies that prioritized home ownership as the keystone of wealth building. Easy mortgage access, federal incentives to buy, and government-backed loans helped boomers build equity quickly. They also shaped the legal and political environment, pushing for zoning laws that restricted dense or affordable housing developments in already established neighborhoods. These exclusionary policies, often justified by arguments about neighborhood character and property values, have choked off the supply of new housing for decades. For Millennials and Gen Z, the dream of home ownership now drifts further out of reach. Soaring real estate prices mean buying a home requires far more upfront capital than it did for boomers. Many are priced out before they even begin saving for a deposit. Meanwhile, rents climb ever higher as fewer people can buy, trapping a generation in a cycle that leaves little room for saving or wealth building. City after city reports declining rates of home ownership among younger generations, while property wealth becomes concentrated among older homeowners. The policies and protections that once opened doors have become locked gates, benefiting those inside and barring those striving to enter. Access to healthcare, closely tied to employment and affordability, highlights yet another front in this generational divide. Boomers often enjoyed robust employer-provided benefits or public programs that ensured a basic level of care. However, the cost of medical insurance and treatment has climbed far faster than wages or inflation. Today's workers, especially those in precarious jobs or gig roles, are far less likely to have reliable health benefits. Faced with expensive premiums, high deductibles, and patchy access, many Millennials and Gen Z delay or forego vital care, risking long-term health for short-term savings. Each barrier, higher education costs, eroded worker protections, housing inaccessibility, fragmented healthcare, has roots not in abstract faith, but in deliberate decisions and priorities. These choices have reshaped opportunity, transforming once enabling institutions into high walls that separate the majority of young adults from the security their parents and grandparents could expect. The impact is both visible and personal, manifesting not just in statistics but in the daily struggles and deferred dreams of a generation burdened by the architecture of inequality. The legacy of boomer-era priorities, protected pensions, favorable tax structures, and highly restrictive housing policies has paved the way for a host of obstacles that Millennials and Gen Z now face. These shifts didn't happen overnight. They are the result of steady policy adjustments and changing economic climates that have altered the financial landscape younger generations must navigate. At the heart of this transformation is the ballooning cost of higher education and the era-defining student debt crisis. A generation ago, college wasn't a ticket to overwhelming debt. Public colleges and universities were heavily subsidized, tuition was manageable, and students often graduated with little to no loans. Boomers could attend university for a modest fee, supported by state grants and broad-based government investment. As financial priorities shifted, however, public funding for higher education was scaled back. Tuition rates soared as schools tried to fill the gap. By the time Millennials reached college age, tuition had taken off, leaving financial aid programs behind. Today, students take on at least 300% more debt than their parents did, with the average U.S. borrower owing over $30,000 by graduation. This debt load isn't just a monthly bill, it determines what young adults can do next. The pressure to pay student loans forces many to delay major life steps. Instead of buying a house or building retirement savings, young people are stuck funneling paychecks to lenders. This constant financial drag limits career flexibility, slows wealth accumulation, and can make the prospect of building a stable future seem impossible. Beyond college costs, another silent agent shapes the struggle of younger generations: stagnant wages. In previous decades, robust unions gave workers clout. Bargaining power translated to rising incomes, secure jobs, and reliable benefits. As union influence eroded, so did wage growth for the average worker. What used to be a steady climb in purchasing power has stalled. Despite higher productivity and a more skilled workforce, inflation adjusted, wages for most young workers have barely budged in decades. Meanwhile, costs for essentials like rent, insurance, and groceries continue to rise. Many find themselves working full-time or cobbling together multiple gigs only to find their paychecks stretched to the breaking point before the next one arrives. This reality means that even those with steady employment struggle to save for emergencies, chip away at debt, or plan for the future. It's a daily hustle, often rewarded by little more than staying afloat. The housing market offers another striking example of intergenerational disparity. Boomers, having locked in homes before the explosion in prices, now benefit as asset values climb. Some own multiple properties and reap income as landlords. At the same time, local governments, often influenced by homeowners' associations and restrictive zoning laws, limit the construction of new, affordable housing. The effects ripple through urban neighborhoods and suburbs alike. With too few homes and a flood of demand, prices soar. In many cities, required down payments and tight mortgage standards shut out younger buyers entirely. Millennials are half as likely to own a home as young adults were in 1975. Instead, millions pay steep rents or live with family, unable to turn their income into assets that can grow over time. This missed opportunity means younger adults cannot benefit from the kind of wealth building that once formed the backbone of middle-class prosperity. Healthcare, too, reflects a withdrawal of benefits once considered standard. Boomers could often count on strong employer-sponsored health coverage, lower out-of-pocket costs, and a stable social safety net. Over time, structural changes in benefits and legislation have led to market-driven plans with high deductibles and limited coverage, especially for those with irregular work or gig jobs. Many millennials and Gen Z workers find themselves without affordable, comprehensive health insurance. Medical costs become another source of anxiety, making it risky to turn down a bad job or try life as a freelancer. Out-of-pocket expenses, co-pays, and surprise bills eat into already thin budgets and increase vulnerability to financial shocks when illness or injury strikes. All these barriers don't just shape wallets, they affect how young people see the world and their future. Each debt payment, stagnant paycheck, unaffordable apartment, or unpaid medical bill sends a message about where power lies and who gets left behind. With each turn, the system erects new hurdles, gradually transforming what was once a relatively straightforward path to financial security into an unpredictable and stressful journey. For many, the sense of standing still, working hard but going nowhere, defines their adult lives, shaping not just bank accounts, but also hopes, plans, and collective attitudes about what's possible. Wages simply have not kept pace with living costs. And nowhere is this clearer than in the mounting hardship young people face just trying to secure basics like housing or healthcare. Millennials who entered adulthood during the financial turbulence of the late 2000s, and Gen Z coming of age amid rising inflation and wages that lag behind the price of essentials, struggle under systemic disadvantages that make it almost impossible to follow the paths laid out by previous generations. Many feel the economic rules have changed, and the odds are stacked against them in ways their boomer parents did not experience. Soaring property prices push homeownership out of reach for most millennials and nearly all Gen Z adults, despite strong aspirations to own. While boomers and even Gen X were often able to purchase first homes in their 20s and early 30s, the average first-time homebuyer is now much older, often in their late 30s or beyond, thanks to the skyrocketing deposit requirements, rapidly rising rents, and punishing student loan payments that eat up down payment savings. For millions of younger adults, each paycheck vanishes into rent or repayments before they even have the chance to consider building wealth through property. Parents and grandparents, often sitting atop large home equity gains, may view this as a matter of fiscal discipline, but for most millennials and Gen Z, the numbers simply do not add up. The economic fallout goes well beyond where people live. Getting a college degree, sold as a ticket to the middle class, has instead saddled entire generations with unprecedented debt burdens. Unlike boomers, many of whom attended college when tuition fees were far lower or even non-existent, today's graduates leave university with staggering sums to repay, often limiting career choices and delaying the milestones of adulthood. Student debt makes saving for a house, investing, or even starting a family very difficult, especially for those who begin their working lives in precarious, underpaid roles. Work itself has become less stable and less secure. Where many baby boomers benefited from steady, long-term employment with pensions, healthcare, and predictable advancement, Millennials and Gen Z must navigate an economy built on gig work, zero-hour contracts, and short-term positions with few benefits. The promise of climbing a stable career ladder has, for many, been replaced by a series of lateral moves or frequent transitions. Qualitative interviews illustrate how boomers themselves admit their own careers relied on a steady buildup of tenure, a route that is nearly impossible for today's younger workers struggling with contract gigs and ongoing job insecurity. Yet, stereotypes about flaky job hopping persists, despite data showing that these patterns mostly reflect the nature of available work and not an unwillingness to commit. These personal costs run deep. Delays in starting families, getting married, or even moving out of parental homes have become common. These delays are not only financial. The uncertainty and anxiety generated by economic instability and an inability to plan for the future shapes how Millennials and Gen Z view themselves and their role in society. Many feel frustration and resentment when older generations imply that their difficulties are the result of laziness or lack of ambition, rather than an environment where even the basics require extraordinary effort. These feelings do not exist in a vacuum. They drive new ways of thinking about politics, work, and society. Surveys show younger generations are more likely to support reforms such as universal healthcare, affordable housing, and student debt relief, viewing these not as luxuries, but as the minimum foundation for a decent life. Many Millennials and Gen Z adults participate in protest movements, activism, and voting blocs motivated by a desire to fix a system they see as unfairly tilted toward protecting boomer-era privileges at their expense. This fuels a growing determination among them to fight for systemic change, even in the face of significant opposition and entrenched stereotypes about entitlement or fragility. Calls for reform are growing louder. Younger generations are demanding more progressive taxation, more funds for social supports, and concrete action to address the crisis in housing and education that define their experience of adulthood. These demands reflect not only a desire for fairness, but a call for recognition, the hope that older generations will acknowledge the role historical decisions have played in creating today's landscape of inequality. Real change, as many argue, will require a shared commitment to dismantling systemic barriers and building a future that offers everyone, not just the fortunate, a real chance at security and belonging. Now that we understand how baby boomers built their wealth on a foundation of favorable policies and economic conditions, often at the expense of younger generations, we can see more clearly the roots of today's struggles. Recognizing these structural barriers is the first step toward changing the system that limits opportunity for Millennials and Gen Z. By learning from history, policymakers, communities, and individuals can work together to create fairer paths to education, housing, and stable work, ensuring future generations aren't trapped by the legacy they inherited, but empowered to build their own financial security and a more just economy.